well, good morning and happy Friday. It is October 9th. Excited to be here with you guys. As I mentioned, we have a full call today, coming off of one of my favorite partner calls of all times last week. And that's mostly because I listened and Adelina talked, which was our design, and just so awesome to go back and listen to that call and take more notes. So thank you once again, Adelina. So maybe I'll start off gratitude this morning, as we always do on Friday, and just say I'm grateful for Adelina and partners that just continue to focus on growth and focus on growing themselves, and by growing themselves, they grow us too. So thank you, everyone who's committed to growth. All right, who else wants to share gratitude this October 9th? So go ahead and raise your hand. I'll get to call on you and hear some gratitude. Georgie.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. I just was having such a great week this week in my experience with this organization as a whole, from so many different corners, from the launch, from Chris's calls, from the partner call with Brevity. Such alignment with the models, the systems, the mindset. And it was just such a wonderful feeling to come home from a day's work and pour into my team and be teaching my team all of the things that have caused me to grow, and to have it reinforced in every area of this organization. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. I know a lot of people are in alignment with me on that thought, and just say thank you to everyone who participates to make that happen.
Awesome. Thank you, Georgie. We appreciate that. Thanks for your kind text this week as well. Hillary.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I have gratitude for everyone on Spinelli Residential Group. We are seeing wins across the board with each and every agent, whether that be someone who just started and is in launch, and the agent partners that we've been with us for a really long time. Teamwork by the entire administrative staff, and it's just been such an amazing week for everyone here, and I'm just really, really grateful.
I love that. You guys are, we're going to talk maybe in a couple of weeks about some of the records our teams have broken, and you guys have already broken almost every record your team has ever set. And those aren't small records. So congrats on just an amazing year with all of SRG, Spinelli Residential. So awesome to see.
Yay, everyone.
Jordan.
Hey, so I just wanted to express some gratitude to you, Chris, and Holly and Brady and John and Carter. And Monday I had kind of a surprise listing presentation that I wasn't really expecting I'd get to do. And so like late Sunday night, I think I messaged you guys and just asked for some advice on it. And y'all were all really prompt to respond. And Carter has been answering questions for me all week. And I mean, it turned into a big win. And I don't know if that would have happened had it not been for y'all and your awesomeness.
Wow, we're happy to do it, and congrats on that. That's your biggest listing of your career, yeah?
It is.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Congrats on that. It's all your hard work, not us, but we're happy to help. Alex.
Yeah, so I want to express my gratitude to Philip. I went on my honeymoon last week, and it always was a little bit stressful for me, or really stressful for me, to separate from my business for a week. And I had a contract go under right before, and Philip just took the reins and I came back, and I didn't feel like I lost any momentum. No, all the paperwork was in order. He just did a phenomenal job. So I just want to shout out Phil.
Awesome. Congrats again, Alex, and thank you, Phil. And we'll take one more bit of gratitude this morning. Holly.
I also also have a gratitude for Phil. Yesterday, we wrapped up our CV Tactics series, and Phil really ended it with a mic drop moment, sharing a big question that you once asked him that Mark Willis had once asked you. And he had a tremendous value. It's something that I have never implemented into my conversations and know that I will. And his expertise and his experience is always appreciated and that he's willing to share.
Thanks, Holly. That question might come up again soon on a podcast. I had the opportunity to spend some time with Mark Willis a couple of weeks ago, and actually turned the table. And he'd interviewed me a couple of times, and so I got to interview him. So we will let you know when that will show up. But it's just actually a really, really powerful conversation with just a tremendous individual, human being, and just a powerhouse in real estate. So look forward to sharing that with everyone here shortly. All right, we're gonna talk briefly about our values, and that's because Gina Dwyer says values bring value to an organization, and by constantly reminding ourselves of what they are and who's showing them, and demonstrations of those values, it'll keep us as a values-grounded organization. And I think more than ever, in the world in which we find ourselves living, values are critically important, and not that they've ever not been important, but more so today, values is what begin to separate you from really everyone else. So who saw any one of our values demonstrated over the last week? Right, we have these values based on growth of giving and relationships and opportunity and wealth and thanks and humility. Who'd like to share? Joel?
Hey, good morning, Chris. I want to shout out Holly's Texas Takeover Austin team for giving. There's 18 of us volunteering tomorrow for 4 hours at the Central Texas Food Bank. And when we came up with the idea and sent out the link for people to sign up, within about 30 minutes, every slot we had reserved was full. So it really just shows how much these people are all about growing their business, but also giving back to the community. So huge shout out for giving to all of them.
Love that. Love that. I'll just share. I'm grateful, and also just a demonstration of values. I was able to have dinner with one of our partners, Leah Slocum from New York. She was actually in Oregon last night, so I drove out and had it was kind of lunch dinner. But just to hear her story of her organization, Peak, her partnership there, and just how focused they are on giving. All I could think of as I drove home was you fit right in. Their entire organization fits right in because of that value of giving. So thanks for sharing that, Joel, and thank you, Leah and team for being such givers as well. Katie.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. I want to recognize Barb Dopp and Jacqueline Smith. Both of them sent me incredible referrals for like-minded individuals in this last week. And that's our value of growth. And it's amazing to me, and it shouldn't shock me really, but that always those referrals that come from within, from our partners, recommendations for people that would really be aligned with our organization, they always are. It's amazing. So thank you both.
Awesome. Thanks, Katie. And one more, and then we'll jump in. Carter?
Hey there, Chris. I just want to recognize John Powers for opportunity. He's really dove in and spearheaded all of the Brivity transitions for all of us here on the experience side of the ship, and he's put a lot of hours and figuring it out and helped giving us all best practices to create a bigger opportunity for all of us. I just want to recognize him for his efforts doing that.
Yeah, it's been a project for sure. And I'll tell you, it's incredibly exciting to see people take that opportunity and begin to use a system and a platform and technology and actually begin to see changes immediately in their business. I've had just ridiculous conversations with some people that are finally plugging in and using it. Hannah just posted, "I'm obsessed with Brivity." Good, because we are too. So thanks for plugging in, and John, thanks for leading at least the transition for many of us that have not been on the platform prior to today. All right, guys, I'm going to ask a question, and would love to get some feedback. When you think of an ostrich, what do you think of? What do you envision? What do you picture? What are ostriches, if they're plural, known for? They're probably not plural. Terrifying bird. Oh no, me. Yeah, I'll tell you, most of us, when we think of an ostrich, see that in our head on your screen if you're in front of a computer, right? We think of that ostrich with its head in the sand. Now, interestingly enough, that's a myth. Ostriches don't put their head in the sand or the dirt if they're scared. They definitely look for food in the dirt. But I came across an interesting study that I wanted to share with you. I shared it with a few of you earlier this week, and I think it's powerful for all of us to pay attention. It's probably one of the more important things that we're going to talk about this morning. There is actually a study, and it's called the ostrich effect. Another word for it is information avoidance. Now, what do you think the ostrich effect or information avoidance is? What would you say if you hear those words, the ostrich effect, information avoidance? What is that?
Not wanting to look at reality.
Yeah, information avoidance is right. Like George A says, ignoring the signs. Katie says, not wanting to look at reality. We're going to talk about reality in just a bit as well. Casey says, willful ignorance. Yeah, here's what shows up in information avoidance. Information avoidance is when we don't look at data or we don't accept information for a variety of reasons, which is a choice, right? Acceptance is a choice. I'd like to add that it's also when we don't like to, agree to, or are unwilling to track what we do each day. Because tracking is what? Tracking is a compilation of data or information. And as I look at who's tracking and who's not, or who loves it and who doesn't, interestingly enough, it's a good time of the year to reflect on whether or not our lack of tracking could be the ostrich effect or information avoidance. See, we avoid things we don't want to hear because psychologists say it will bring us psychological discomfort. Psychological discomfort, write that word down, or I guess it's a phrase down. When you hear that phrase, what do you think of? What is psychological discomfort? How would you define that? Go ahead and raise your hand or just say. What is psychological discomfort?
Like that inner pain, the kind that comes from the inside.
Yeah, for some of us, it could mean lots of different things, right? All of us have different psychological discomfort. Katie says it's that inner pain, right? So she took discomfort to a whole nother level and said pain. Andrew, right? It's stress that shows up. Here's why we're talking about it, because the ostrich effect can diminish our decisions and lead to unintended consequences. Researchers say that information avoidance can diminish our decisions and lead to unintended consequences. Now, the reason why this caught my mind, is because right now, I am working and have been working the last 6 months on a project around mastering judgment. Right? And judgment is decision-making. I believe that if we can improve the decision-making of our organization and the judgment of our organization, that will be our competitive advantage in 2021. And so we are working on actually a course on mastering judgment and mastering decision-making. So if the ostrich effect diminishes decision-making, then I need to figure that out, right? We need to figure that out. We've shared some thoughts from Naval recently. Naval Ravikant, one of the best investors, the smartest, the best judge of investment opportunities in the world today. He said this in a recent blog. He said, if you have two choices to make, And they're relatively equal choices. So let's use this: tracking or not tracking. They're relatively equal. It does not take a whole lot of energy to track. So if you have two choices to make and they're relatively equal choices, he says, take the path more difficult and painful in the short term. So which one's more difficult and painful? Tracking or not tracking? Sure. So he says, take the path more difficult and painful, but here's why. He said, what's actually going on is one of these paths requires short-term pain, and the other leads to pain further out in the future. Let me say that again. One of those paths requires short-term pain, the tracking, and other leads to pain further out in the future, not tracking. And what your brain is doing, he says, through conflict avoidance, is trying to push off short-term pain. He said, by definition, if the two are even and one has short-term pain, that path has long-term gain associated with it. Your brain is overvaluing the side with short-term happiness, right? Just not tracking, right? Not having to look at the reality of the situation. And they're trying, and our brain is trying to avoid the path of short-term pain. Because I guarantee you, if you tracked, there would be some short-term pain, right? Because when we look at what we're actually doing and what that's leading to, oftentimes there's some pain in that reality because we have to deal with the fact that we didn't do what we said we were going to do, or we're not doing what we know it's going to take to actually win. You know, it's interesting. As of this moment, I can tell you we're 77% of the way through the year. We are 73% of the way towards our goal of homes sold in the organization, 76% of the way towards our goal in volume sold. We're 79% of our way towards our goal in GCI and 78% of the way towards our profit goal. Why do I know that? Because I'm tracking. I'm tracking. I'm willing to look at reality and say, okay, well, if we're 77, we're technically 77.8% of the way through the year. But if we're 78% of the way through the year and we're 76% of the way towards our goal for volume as an organization, we're 2% behind, aren't we? I know that because I'm willing to track. Now, why? There is absolutely some short-term pain in that. I will tell you, as you adjust, and some of you have, just like we're moving to Brevity, some of you have adjusted and moved to completely new tracking systems. And I'll tell you, they track everything for you. That short-term pain brings long-term results. Emily Ho is probably one of the foremost researchers on this information avoidance conversation. And ostrich, she says the ostrich effect is avoiding information when we expect the outcome to be bad. Think about that. We avoid information when we expect the outcome to be bad. Let me give you two examples. And these were incredible to me. She said, so I did some research on the health industry, and I did some research in the financial industry. And this is what she found. Those at risk of certain diseases are less likely to get tested for those diseases. So she began to research Huntington's disease. It's a terrible disease, guys. It starts usually in people's early 30s or 40s. And usually Huntington's disease results in progressive, right? Just it reduces your movement. It reduces cognitive thinking. There are strong psychiatric symptoms. The problem with that disease right now is no cure exists. It's a terminal disease. Now, the symptoms are very, very clear, right? In your 30s or 40s, it is very clear that you have symptoms of Huntington's disease, and it's hereditary. So typically, you know someone in your family that had it, and yet only 7% of people get tested for it. 7% of people with Huntington's disease get tested. Why? Because they like to believe that if they don't get tested, they don't have it. Guys, it's hereditary. The symptoms are obvious, but because there's no cure, because the outcome is bad, we avoid it. We don't go to the doctor and say, hey, I think I should get tested for this. My grandfather had it, my grandmother had it, my father had it. Emily Ho, health economist at Brown University. And she said people refrain from getting tested because they don't want to believe they have issues. Like she said, we have found this to be the case in Huntington's disease. We found it to be the case in neurological diseases. We found this to be the case in STDs. We found it to be, people don't get tested because they're like, I don't want to know what I have. Then she went into the financial world, guys. And here is an interesting study. Financial research shows that when the stock market is down, investors refrain from looking at their stock. But when the stock market is up, they look at their stock portfolio all the time. Yeah, you too. When the S&P is up, investors log into their account at an incredibly higher rate than when the S&P is down. They can predict percentages of who's logging into their online investment account based on if the S&P is up or down. This behavior persists even over the weekend when the market is closed and the investor can't even do anything about their account, but they keep logging in when the S&P is up. Information avoidance came down to how that information was going to make you feel. Now, some of you are loving your trackers right now. Why? Because you're having the best year you've ever had. Some of you are hating your trackers right now. Why? Because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing or what you told yourself you would. Do not fall into the ostrich effect. We oftentimes do not obtain the information. And here's a critical piece I want us to leave with today. If you are struggling with tracking and you don't know why, it is oftentimes because you think you can't do anything with that information or about that information. And if you find yourself there, talk to your coach, talk to your team lead, talk to someone, because the fact is I love data because I know that I can control the outcome of anything that I know about. See, that is my inner belief. All of us need to believe that you can have an effect on the outcome of that data. If you don't, you won't want to look at it. Information avoidance shows up oftentimes when you do not believe you can change or affect the bad outcome that you think might show up. When we have a low sense of control, we have a lot of information avoidance. So I'm going to tell you, as an organization, the percentage that say, yes, I want to adopt a new tracker. Yes, I want to dive all in, tells me what percentage of our organization believes they can control the outcome. Those that have agency over their lives tend to want information more. Tracking, data review, accountability. Our leaders know how to track, know how to read data, know how to be accountable around that data. So if you're struggling, reach out to whoever's coaching you, reach out to whoever's leading you and say, hey, I want an appointment about data, tracking, and accountability. Fair? Let's switch the conversation for just a minute, almost literally. For just a minute. We oftentimes find ourselves having conversations of how we need to improve productivity, right? And not waste time. Anyone feel that? Who here struggles when they feel they're not having a productive day, a productive morning, productive moments? Who has that anxiety show up? Many of us experience anxiety if we find ourselves without something to do in the middle of the day. It's 2 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock, and we have 10 minutes. Shouldn't I be doing something? Why don't I have something to do? Right? There's that anxiety around that. Or when we don't know the answer, right? Someone asks us and there's the anxiety around like, okay, what do I say? What do I say? What do I say? What do I say? Who struggles with that? Those moments of unproductive or non-productive time. You know, I'll let you in on a secret. Our Friday calls are a demonstration of my aversion to non-productive time, right? I assure you that every Friday call, there's enough content for about 2 or 3 hours of call. But I want every single minute to be productive, as I value your time more than you realize, right? So I try to get as much information as possible into that hour. I literally have, and some of you have, and I appreciate it, have gotten texts that say, hey, why don't we just slow those down a bit? Why there's too much information? Why don't you take one topic per Friday? Well, perhaps it's my aversion to non-productive time. As humans, many of us feel awkward with silence. with quiet, with downtime. We naturally want to fill it. With that in mind, we're going to run our own experiment. Let's see how you feel if we were just slightly less productive for even 30 seconds, just slightly less productive. Now, as we start this, don't worry, you didn't lose connection. Don't hang up. Don't fill the silence. But let's see what happens starting now. Well, the good news is no one dropped off the call. That was 30 seconds, guys. 30 seconds. How uncomfortable is it to be in quiet for 30 seconds? Well, perhaps slightly more uncomfortable for me because my face was on camera. But that is hard. 30 seconds is difficult. Oftentimes, that moment is awkward silence. But here's what I came across. I came across an article that looked at Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos. They run two of the most valuable companies in the world, right? I love the comments right now. Immediate anxiety right, for all of us. Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos run two of the most valuable companies in the world. I'll tell you, my anxiety was high too, because 30 seconds of like quiet time on a Friday call is crazy. But from the outside, they seem to exhibit two very, very different personalities. Tim Cook and Jeff Bezos are very different humans, but within their companies, both men are known for a fascinating practice, guys. They each embrace the rule of awkward silence. Now, they do it a little bit differently. The rule of awkward silence is quite simple. When faced with a challenging question, a problem, instead of answering, instead of jumping into solution mode, they pause and they think deeply about how they want to answer. Now, in their organizations, this is no short pause. Rather, it often takes 10, 20, 30 seconds of pause before they think things through and respond. Now, if you're on the receiving end of that and not used to that style of communication, it can be incredibly awkward, can't it? At Apple, Cook has engaged in this practice for years. Back in 2008, there was a Fortune article. In Fortune, there's an article that did an interview with him. And Cook said, I am known for long, uncomfortable pauses. At Amazon, Bezos actually utilizes the rule of awkward silence, but in a much more methodical way. It involves, and I've confirmed this with my brother who works there, it involves taking time at the beginning of meetings, reportedly, right? And this is fact, up to 30 minutes. To do what? To read all the memos that were handed out in advance of that meeting in silence. Now, the idea is that meeting participants have time to look over the memo, to think about the memo, to think about what they're going to talk about, and to scribble notes of their thoughts and ideas, all without interruption for 30 minutes. Now, Bezos said, like, for new employees, it is strange. It is a very strange initial experience. But he said these silent starts ensure that the undivided attention of those participants who may not have dedicated the time to think about the memo prior to, they're all there and they're all focused on coming to the table with a solution. Cook and Bezos are not alone in embracing this, the rule of awkward silence. Elon Musk often takes anywhere from between 5 to 15 to 20 seconds of thinking before giving an answer. Now, he's also done some interviews where he didn't think before he spoke, and we've listened to those. But the fact is in real interviews, in business interviews, you'll often watch him or listen to him, and there are 15 seconds of silence. And you think, well, say something. But the rule of awkward silence has always been valuable as a tool for emotional intelligence because it allows you to balance thought and emotion instead of simply reacting based on feeling. Some of us do the reacting based on feeling incredibly well. And by well, I mean, we just have some work to do with that emotional intelligence. See, the rule of awkward silence is a sign of emotional intelligence. So who wants to build their emotional intelligence? Today, that rule is more useful than ever, guys. We live in a world of just instant gratification, right? The world demands it. Emails need to be answered same day. Slack and text messages should be answered right now. But there's a major problem with that instantaneous communication. And the article about Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook said that instant response and that instant communication just doesn't leave time to think. Critical thinking demands time. Critical thinking, if you're taking notes, write these two words down. Critical thinking calls for deep and careful consideration of a subject. It requires introspection and retrospection. What's introspection? When you hear the word introspection, what do you think of? How would you define that? Who wants to share that? Raise your hand. I think Wes, your hand was up from before. I must have missed it. What is introspection? Anyone? I'll tell you. Introspection, yeah, it's looking inside. Introspection is the examination or observation of one's own mental and emotional processes. So oftentimes we're like, oh, I'm going to be introspective. It's not just thinking about how we think. It is an examination and observation of our own mental and emotional processes, right? Those with high emotional intelligence understand why they do things or why they respond certain ways or what causes them to respond certain ways. So the first part of critical thinking requires introspection. The second is retrospection. So what's retrospection? Retrospection is the action of looking back on or reviewing past events or situations, especially those of your own life. So the first is looking inside and saying, okay, well, what is my own mental and emotional process that I go through? And Austin is right. Retrospection is looking at the past events, past situations in our own life. And that leads to what? Critical thinking. It involves weighing and analyzing facts. It involves careful reasoning. And interestingly enough, the article says it results in making insightful connections and good decisions. Good decisions, right? Decision making, judgment. None of that is possible, however, if we don't take time. If we don't use time while we make decisions. Unfortunately, time has become the biggest luxury on the planet, hasn't it? But here's what's so interesting. When we embrace that rule of awkward silence, we steal back time. That's a luxury, and we're stealing it back. Time that used to be wasted, honestly, on nonsense answers. Time that used to be wasted on telling other people what you think they want to hear or what you immediately want to say, as opposed to what they need to hear or what you truly believe. Now, here are the benefits. Once you practice this awkward silence enough, well, first, we won't find it awkward anymore, right? It'll be routine and natural. But here's what also this awkward silence allows you to do. Number one, put the outside world on mute. Now, some of us would love to do this. Put the outside world on mute. It allows you to exercise your thinking faculties. It allows you to get to the root problem more effectively. It allows you to give deeper, more thoughtful answers. It allows you to bring your emotions into balance. It allows you to remain in harmony with your values and your principles. It allows you to say what you mean and mean what you say. And it increases your confidence. Is there a downside to the awkward silence? Not at all. That might sound like a lot of benefit for 10 to 20 seconds, but it's amazing what your brain can accomplish once it's given just a little bit more time to do what it was designed to do, think through things. So the next time you get that challenging question, resist that temptation to respond with the first thing that comes to your mind, right? It's emotionally intelligent to think before you speak. And that awkward silence, even that 10, that 20, that 30 seconds, guys, right? That 30 seconds that we shared, that was plenty of time to truly think about an incredibly brilliant response if we needed to. Thoughts or ahas about the awkward pause? Who wants to share what they're thinking? I know many people have commented in the chat box, but I don't read those while I'm going. Who wants to share vocally as they think about that awkward pause? Go ahead and raise your hand. I can call on you. Georgie?
Yeah, I couldn't help but think about, the exercises that I've gone through of really focusing on my top 5 values and the practice of thinking time, how valuable internalizing what my values are in life has come to my decision-making processes when I have my thinking time, and how it relates to the mistakes and the things that have happened to me in the past. So everything that you're saying is so powerful. But I made a comment about values because I think that expedites and gets to the bottom line really well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I was thinking as you were speaking, it reminded me, I had a conversation just yesterday. It was with Leah actually, and we were talking about my daughter, and I have one daughter that is just a thinker, right? She thinks almost too much, but she thinks through everything. And the other daughter is just super like jump right in. And I find myself, and maybe this isn't great parenting, by the way, so don't take my lesson. I find myself a few times a day using the expression, like, what were you thinking, right? Like how people have used that with me too. Like, what were you thinking? And the real answer to that is, well, I wasn't, because I didn't take the time to. So if you ever find someone asking you that question, what were you thinking? The fact is we weren't, because I guarantee you, we didn't take that awkward pause to think through what we're about to do or what we're about to say. Delby, you want to share?
Yes, I love this because as I think about this, like, it's really hard for me. I almost stopped breathing. Like, I felt like my heart was just going really fast when I stopped. And truly, I've been studying Genesis, and we were created to work, do, be, create, all these things. But at the same time, we were also commanded to rest and slow down and recover. And without that recovery, it's hard to move forward. You eventually hit a wall. So it's part of and it's in the world that we live in today, with technology, with phones, with brevity, that I'm on like 2 hours sleep because my mind keeps just racing. It's so important to shut everything off, everything, the silence of all things, especially technology.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what I want to say.
It's in our code, right? I mean, if we look at ourselves like computers, which I don't want to do, but if we look at ourselves designed a certain way, we're designed to have that rest, which means we must do it. Let's transition and talk about perspective. We're going to talk about perspective in a different way today. In fact, we're going to run another experiment. Clearly, today is the day of experiments for me. I'm going to share something with you. It's the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Who knows what the Mueller-Lyer illusion is? Anyone? Let me share this. Well, we'll see if it lets me. In the late 1800s, German psychiatrist Franz Mueller-Lyer designed one of the world's most famous visual illusions. In that visual illusion, which I'm going to share right now, it's going to look a little bit weird for you, but that's okay. on your screen, I know it's a PowerPoint, but bear with me here. This is the Mueller-Lyer illusion. Now, in the late 1800s, German psychiatrist Franz Mueller-Lyer designed this. And the illusion became popular because it was easy to recreate, but very difficult to shake. And it began with a simple question: which of the following two vertical lines above is longer? Which one's longer, A or B? Which one would you say is longer, A or B? Now, if you're like most, it's interesting. If you're like most people in the modern world, line B appeared longer than line A. Now you're right, guys. The two lines are identical in length. But for decades, vision researchers assumed that that illusion told them something fundamental about human vision, right? When they showed the illusion to people with normal vision, they were convinced that the line with the inward pointing arrows would seem longer than the line with the outward pointing arrows. And that assumption wasn't really tested, though, before the 1960s, because until then, everybody that was tested was what cultural psychologists call weird, which is W-E-I-R-D, weird, which means they're from Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic societies, right? So everybody that was tested prior to them was weird, and they all, right, within reason, would say, well, line B appears longer, line B appears longer. In the early 1960s, 3 researchers remedied that oversight when they showed this illusion to 2,000 people from 15 different cultural groups. And here's what they found. Those researchers journeyed into Africa and began testing people from several African tribes, Bushmen from Southern Africa, in Angola and the Ivory Coast. And Bushmen from Southern Africa failed to see the difference in the line at all. They perceived the lines just like many of you, right, said, well, those lines are identical. And here's why. In the absence of biological differences, the answer was, of course, cultural. Like, why did one group of people see them as the same and another group of people see them as different? And what they found is, in contrast to most Western societies, the Bushmen lived in worlds where very few straight lines existed. Their houses were made of thatch. They were rounded. They didn't have hard lines that dominated the Western interiors of our homes, like corners, right? They spent most of their time gazing at grassland and trees and water that lacked geometric angles. So why should this matter? Over years and years, people who lived in hard geometric interiors became used to judging the size of objects based on the rules of three-dimensional visual perspective. And as I read this, I thought, well, gosh, this is a challenge for some of us. They said from years of living indoors in structures with perpendicular walls, you know, without even paying attention that for instance, let me show you a different picture. You know that when you look at something geometrically, let me share that again. Now come down to this picture. We know immediately that what? Well, wall A and wall B are the same height, aren't they? Wall A is closer to you, so it casts this larger image on the retina of your eye, at the back of your eye, but you're so familiar with the basic principles of perspective that you correct for that difference. The lines that wall A creates where it meets the floor and the ceiling are similar to line A in the Mueller-Lyer illusion, and the line that wall B creates are similar to line B. When you see configurations like line A, you're reminded of objects that are close to you and aren't actually as large as they appear. And in contrast, configurations like line B remind you of objects that are far away and are actually larger than they appear. In your head, we make those corrections automatically. So line B looks longer than it is usually, and line A looks shorter than it is usually. Those intuitions, though, are bound up in cultural experience. They're bound up in what we know. The Bush people in Africa didn't have those cultural experiences. They didn't share those intuitions. because they hadn't been exposed to the same geometric configurations. Here's what's so interesting. They said our culture does this to us a lot. We curate objects for our children. Think about those with young ones, right? What do we say? We hold up pictures and we say, hey, this is the puppy. This is a square. This is a circle. Like, we begin shaping their world and how they view the world from an early age. So my question, as I came across this study, is, where is this happening in our business? We have all come from being shaped from different, some of us, different organizations, different companies, different places. We've built differently. We've grown our business up to this point differently. And yet, Ben and I were talking this morning, and we have this group, this crop of business owners that are beginning to reshape their thinking and their perspective of how to run a real estate business. And guess what? We have multiple people that are breaking through that $1 million mark for the first time. We have multiple people that will truly net $1 million this year within our organization. But where in business can perspective, or where in business can we not be willing to change our perspective? Perhaps based on our experiences with a certain type of lead gen, we tap out. Perhaps with our experiences when we get rejected, we have a reaction. Perhaps based on our experience with success or failure, perhaps based on our experience with a big team or a large team, like I don't want to grow, or right? Perhaps based on our experiences, even with personal worth and value, we struggle. If our viewpoints or perspectives are based on our cultural upbringing, we may have a lot of work to do to undo our path towards success. Well, the good news is we're here to help you. We're doing that work with you. We're here to break down those walls, right? Well, I guess those lines. And we're asking everybody to be willing to see things differently, because as we're willing to adjust our perspective and what we bring to what we're looking at, we'll have an opportunity to change our results as well. Laura, you have your hand raised. I might have missed it from earlier, but did you want to share something?
And if you're talking to Laura Britton, it may have been an accident. Sorry about that, Chris.
Oh, no worries. No worries, Laura. At least I got to hear your voice. Thank you.
Thank you.
What comes to mind as we think of line A or line B? What comes to mind as we actually think about that fascinating experiment of the Western world looking at those lines and coming up with a different idea than people from different cultures that live and see things differently? What do you think we need to be careful of? Anyone want to share before we move on?
This kind of just reminded me of, right, your thinking dictates your world. And when in watching some of the mega teams who have broken through some incredible barriers, that the change happened first in their minds, right? What they believe to be possible for themselves. Like you said, restructuring thinking. And I really feel that that is what growth is. It's a much more challenging thing to accomplish, that internal world shift. And yet it's absolutely possible because we have evidence of it.
Yeah. Next week, we're going to talk about what gets in the way of reality. I mean, the fact is, as we look at those lines, something gets in the way of reality. It's really interesting as well. Some of us, as a child, I hated those optical illusion books. Remember those books that you'd hold up and some kids would see things and I couldn't see it. And I thought, well, gosh, what is wrong with me? And then I read this study and I realized, well, I clearly saw the world differently, right? And perhaps it was what, as I grew up, what I saw visually. It's really interesting. The optical illusion, and it was a study on optical illusion, but optical illusion is all about what our perception has been trained to see and then believe. And I think that once we understand that that is easily changeable, if we're willing to, right? Easily by choice, it does take time. Well, then the only thing standing between us and, like, let's bring this back to business, between the business that we wish to have in the business that we have today is the perception of things, right? What we're willing to do or not do, what we're willing to see or not see. And speaking of seeing, and Katie's comment about that internal, we're going to share one more topic with you. And it has to do with the brain. Andrew Huberman is one of probably the foremost brain researchers of our time right now. He's at Stanford University. He's actually a colleague of Carol Dweck that has done so much study around the growth mindset, but that involves a lot of study in the brain as well. Andrew's just an incredible speaker. And he was talking about, I'm going to give one example and then we're going to loop it back around, but he was talking recently about what happens when we get upset. I would venture to guess that most of us have been upset at some point in time this week, right? Maybe we're upset about a client, maybe we're upset about a family member, maybe we're upset about a transaction, maybe we're upset about something that just didn't get done, maybe we're upset about, we're not even sure what we're upset about, but we're upset. And he said, here's what happens when we get upset. He said, interestingly enough, his research, by the way, stems from the fact that our brain and our bodies are incredibly connected. He believes it follows this path of sensation, perception, feeling, thought, and action, right? I'm going to say that again because that process or that rhythm is critically important to our conversation and his work. It goes from sensation to perception to feeling to thought to action, sometimes incredibly fast. So he said, when you have that sensation, right, or any sensation that causes you to be upset, interestingly enough, what they have found is your pupils actually dilate. So next time you're upset, run to a mirror and look at your pupils, and you will find your pupils actually dilating. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, he said you are physically beginning to see your world in portrait mode, as opposed to panoramic. Your camera of your brain, your eyes, begin to zero in and go into portrait mode, as opposed to what? Oftentimes, if we're upset and we could take a step back and see the big picture and see the panoramic approach, what happens? Well, we're not so upset anymore, are we? But when we're upset, we literally begin to focus on what's making us upset, even visually, even more. This is very, very true. During the fires, I'll tell you, like, the world went on, transactions went on, agent complaints and brokerages went on. And I found myself saying, how could you even be complaining about this right now? Like, take a step back and look at the big picture. However, that's easier said than done, because what happens when that agent or when this human being or when this person is upset at something, their eyes dilate and they go into portrait mode. In addition to that, someone said earlier, and I think it was Deldy, that when she got just slightly nervous with that awkward pause or silence, she felt herself like even her heart beating a little bit faster. Well, guess what happens physically to our bodies as we get upset or anxious or stressed? Your perception of timing is faster. Now think of this. Some of us are wildly impatient human beings. I know, because we talk, but we always want things done faster than they're happening. And we're upset about it. Well, guess what happens? In addition to us focusing on that problem, our perception of timing is faster in that moment as well. So the world, right, outside of you, the world seems to be going slower than your internal time clock. Think about the last time you were late at the airport. It was everybody else's fault, and everybody else was moving slower in the terminal than they ever have. Ever feel like things are just not moving fast enough for you and you're upset about it? That isn't helping you. Now, on the flip side of that, maybe you're calm, Maybe you're not calm, but you're just fatigued. You are tired. You are exhausted. Your internal world is going now much slower, and your external world seems to be going much faster, right? And that's frustrating because you're fatigued and tired and can't keep up with that external world. See, our perception of our external world comes from the internal. The state of mind when someone is upset recruits your entire body, right? Your state of mind, you're upset, and it begins to recruit your entire body: sensation, perception, feeling, thought, and action. Now, here's the win, guys. And Andrew Huberman's study and research has been around this fact. Our win and opportunity is the brain and the body are ridiculously interconnected. When the mind isn't where it wants to be, then we actually can use our body to intervene. Think about your brain. Your brain, your eyes, he says, are part of your brain, right? They are literally connected to your brain. You know what else is literally connected to your brain? Your skeletal system, right? Your whole skeletal system connected to the brain. They are one piece of your body. If you pulled them out of your body and laid them down, you would have two eyes, a brain, and a skeleton. Now, when we need to shift our brain state quickly from being upset, we have to use our body. Now, one way is through exercise, right? Some of us do that. We move our body. We all the senses that we get while exercising and running or working out or whatever you're doing, or jumping on the bike, right? Kelly? Another way is through breathing. So even if you can't do that exercise, breathing is a way to change your brain state. There is a direct connection between the brain and your diaphragm. Why? Because the diaphragm is actually a skeletal muscle that regulates our breathing. It's unlike any other organ in our body. It's different than our lungs. It's different than our heart. And here's why. Because it's actually a striated muscle, and it can be voluntarily controlled. You can't voluntarily control your lungs. You think you can because you're going to take a breath. You can't voluntarily control your heart, but you can voluntarily control your diaphragm. And so his work has shown that there are parts of our body that we can control that absolutely changes our mind. There's a direct connection between the brain and your diaphragm. Breathing is always available for voluntary control. Now, I'm going to give you his tactical way to control your emotion. He said it's 2 inhales and an extended exhale. So do that just for a minute. Not that you're upset. It's that an extended exhale. Now, when do you oftentimes do that? He said, interestingly enough, that double inhale and exhale happens twice or 2 times a lot. When you sleep, and Katie, you're right, when you're crying. Anyone see a crier? I mean, we've all seen criers. Some people say, gosh, I'm a terrible crier. I'm not a pretty crier, right? It's that double breathing and that exhale. You know what your body is doing? It is actually controlling, looking to, and trying to control your emotion. It actually, in that double inhale, is pushing out carbon dioxide in the alveoli of your lungs, those air sacs. It's controlling those air sacs, right? You don't control your lung, but your diaphragm can change it and move it. It pushes out carbon dioxide and then lets in oxygen. It lets more oxygen into your system. You ever watch someone sleep, not creepily, but just because you love them, right? Your children, your partner, you'll see them do that double inhale and that exhale, calming you down. How about your puppies? Your dogs do it all the time, don't they? Same thing. That double inhale opens up those lungs, pushes out carbon dioxide, and brings in oxygen. And you know what? It's the fastest way to bring the mind and body into a more relaxed state. So with that, it's exactly the top of the hour. Use that this week. Right? We're going to be walking around doing double inhales and a long exhale. People will think you are crazy, but listen, you are not. You are controlling your emotion, which means you will make better decisions, right? By changing our perspective and take some awkward silence. That's our wrap up for the call today. Thanks for being with me. Thanks for all those that participated and shared and commented along the way. If you need me, you know where I am. Let's make it a great weekend. Thanks, guys.